Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Gyanamurtim Dvandvaititam Gagana Sadrisham Tatvamashadi Laksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Triguna Rahitam Sadgurum Tam Namami. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We salute the leader of our souls. Through his grace, our ignorance is dispelled, who is beyond good and bad, life and death, pleasure and pain, and all other pairs of opposites. We recognize that one as the only witness to the changing phenomena of this universe. May we, through that grace, go beyond darkness and delusion and realize the truth in this very life. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all living beings. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Well, we missed a week in there, so it's been a month since the last class that we had, and we were focusing on verse 11 of the Encomium. And in this verse, our poet sage says that along the early on in the superlative path, my guru came and warned me about the 16 evolutes of Maya. And then I forget what comes next after that, except that he says he takes on the 10 tenets of Samkhya. So, and rises above those 16 evolutes of Maya. So before we launch into more of a review on that, now, actually, we'll just jump into it. Let me share my screen. I had suggested to everyone that they memorize at least the first 8 of the 10 tenets of Samkhya. And as I was going through that myself and also thinking about these 16 evolutes of Maya, I settled in on Purusha is distinct from Prakriti and its evolutes, because that's exactly the piece we need to know, the Siddhanta or conclusion that we want to come to when we look at the earlier tenets and the ones that come out. And when we take a look at these different ways that the human mind accepts limitation in the form of these 16 evolutes and then runs with it, right? So Purusha is distinct from Prakriti and its evolutes. And it also put me in mind of our fellowship meeting on Sunday, where in the course of the conversation, Akshaya Bhakti, she reminded us of Sri Ramakrishna's statement that you cannot totally get rid of the passions, that they are there in the human mind. And what we have to do is reduce them to a minimum. So we have a tendency, and I was talking about this with Babaji as well, we have a tendency in spiritual life to think that everyone, that all the great saints and sages completely rise above all of these. It may be that they don't exhibit them because they've reduced it to a minimum. And so they're no longer in a reactive mode. They know what their true identity is, or they're identified with their chosen ideal. And so as these things rise up, they neither give vent to them, nor do they brood on them either, because they still see it there. Remember what Sri Ramakrishna said also, that these things become like burnt ropes. You can just blow on them. They have the appearance of being there, but they can no longer bind you any more than a burnt rope can bind us. So then, the spiritual aspirant walks this fine line, or this razor sharp edge of neither falling into complacency around these, nor giving vent to them. So we have to exercise that control. Now, the other thing that we mentioned last time was that we only just went through a bare explanation of each of these evolutes. And I wanted this time to give us a little more feel, at least of a few of them. So forgetfulness of one's true nature, that one's quite straightforward. And we've spoken so many times about the issue of I, me, and mine, and how that limits and qualifies and really diminishes the mind. We know that body attachment is an issue. And we know that most of the people that we are around mistake the body for the self. For them, the self and the body are the same thing. And we also, many of us probably recognize that we have kind of a knee-jerk assumption, an unconscious assumption around that. And as soon as it rears its head, because we're walking seriously this spiritual path, we refute that in our mind. So then there's sense attachment. And again, as spiritual aspirants, we're quite aware of this, and we look at it and we decide which ones are truly problematic and which ones are just part of living life. It's not so much attachment, but expression, letting the mind go out consciously. If we let the mind go out without our willing it or allowing it consciously, then we get into this bahir mukha vritti. And this is one of the first ones I wanted to just give a quote from Footfalls. So this is the outward mind, the outward going mind that fixates continually on external stimuli, and usually of the mundane variety. And then some further on in Babaji's description, he says, unable to curb its wayward tendencies, beings, that means the mind's wayward tendencies, beings give the mind free rein and suffer. Once the mind's thoughts are habitually given to the outside world, it is much harder to withdraw them and place them within where peace abides. And so, distraction itself becomes the habit. People catch them, have this habit of always going out. They're not happy unless the mind is going out, because they're not comfortable just sitting within themselves. So this is the first one, that when perhaps as we begin our spiritual life and moving on into intermediate regions of it, these are the ones that we might still find ourselves noticing a lot, even in our own selves. Then I'm going to skip Ashanatrayam for right now and move on to Shatavadana, because Bahir Mukha Vritti and Shatavadana go together very closely. This is thinking of and doing 100 things at once, multitasking. And so Babaji, I have a little quote from him. It says, beings find it difficult to focus with one pointed concentration because they have habitually succumbed to various distractions over time. This fragments human awareness so that it cannot focus sufficiently. And he also notes in there that this can lead to mental disorders. When we let this become a habit, quote unquote, on the outside, it becomes a habit in the unconscious state. And so that's a lot, in the yogic realm of method and controlling the mind, is that controlling these samskaras of, just like this, of shatavadana, or scattered awareness. And yeah, well, I'll have to save that one for later. Okay, so then another one, this kartritva abhimana. So we mistake the self as an agent. Again, we've talked about that many, many times. And it's really as simple as going through these 10 tenets of Samkhya as part of our apavada, our refutation, the practice of refutation, that hones our discrimination and helps boost us into renunciation or detachment. And this Visamvada Brahma, this is the cloak of mistaken identity, taking something that is temporal, illusory, or dreamlike to have its own existence or reality. So again, in so many different ways, we have discussed this in classes with Babaji. We read it constantly in the scriptures. So we'll move on from that one. And viparita bhavana, the assumption that the world is the only reality. We wouldn't be in this class right now if we accepted that as true. So let's move on to the next four, because these are something that are so ingrained in Western society that, and if we've had lifetimes here in the West, then we might find that these show up more for us and maybe are a little more problematic, possibly. So vritti-jnana is this a knowledge attained by the activity of the mind. This knowledge is empirical. It pertains to the earth, lower knowledge, and is limited to the physical universe alone. So it is not beneficial for the realization of higher truth. Laboring under the misconception that the mind's worldly knowledge is somehow absolute. So here's where, if for those whom this is a real problem, and we recognize it out there in the intellectual realms, that beings are unaware of the source of all knowledge. They don't even think about that, higher or lower. So this is, we can also call this the intellectual frame of reference, which also refers to Tarkika Buddhi coming up here. So Babaji also notes that it's impelled by the pursuit of wealth, pleasure, and power. So as spiritual aspirants, we're not impelled so much by the pursuit of wealth, pleasure, and power. We've already recognized that, or we probably wouldn't be sitting here. But the other piece of this vritti-jnana is a tendency, I would say, is a tendency to hear the teachings and then maybe not go through the process of contemplating them enough, or contemplating them, but not allowing the mind to settle on a conclusion that helps boost one beyond the intellectual frame of reference into a true realization of higher knowledge. So here I'm talking about just reading the scriptures and not assimilating is what I'm talking about. So that can be a little bit of vritti-jnana taken in a somewhat different direction than these quotes necessarily take it. So then the next one is dosha dristi. Dosha is faults, imperfections, and dristi is seeing them. So this is the tendency to find fault with others and to see imperfection everywhere, while overlooking what is inherently perfect, the self within, the witness, the seer, the purusha. This, the fact that it's being explained here as seeing imperfection everywhere, and at the same time overlooking what is inherently perfect, this casts aside the idea that Eastern spiritual teachings are negative, right? So we're trying to set things aside. If for us, discrimination between the real and the unreal, negating what is unreal to reach the source of reality, is not seeing imperfection in the way most people would think of that. This is discrimination. And while we were, or discernment, while we were in India, this idea came up in the context of a discussion with one of the swamis that we met, Swami Sarvalokananda. And he said, no, 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 no. This is refutation. It's negation. He says, there's no hate in negate. And that just sort of became a kind of slogan that we had for a while. You'd hear people say it, no hate and negate, right? So here, the main thing we want to know, we want to see is that we perform this discrimination. This is not fault finding, but the problem of fault finding is there with always harping on the negative and never looking at the true source, at the seer, at the witness, at the Purusha, at the Divine Mother. So Babaji goes on and says, this tendency of the mind proceeds from the unripe ego that is insecure at one moment and puffed up with pride the next. It is a wavering mental condition, reflective of spiritual immaturity. So then we can see that these two, stay a problem in the unripe spiritual practitioner. Tarkika buddhi is, again, I think, something else that is rife in Western circles. And this is the intellect that always argues. It's indicative of possessiveness around one's small store of knowledge. And it belies insecurity and closed-mindedness, such as only my watch keeps the correct time. So sometimes we get an opportunity to see this in satsangs or spiritual discussions where somebody asks questions a lot, but doesn't wait. It just keeps the questions flowing and is not really listening to the answers. As soon as the answers are given, the questions are asked again. So, more questions come out. So this is kind of a flavor, not a flavor, but an aspect of Tarkika buddhi. Another aspect of Tarkika buddhi, and maybe linked to dosha dristi, is a kind of one-upsmanship. I have to have the last word. So I have to find a flaw in what you say. And when this is done with the teacher, it's so detrimental for one's spiritual progress. Arrogance is a part of it. And so the remedy for this naturally is humility, and humility in the presence of holy company, and patience with our ability to understand the teachings. It's, for most spiritual practitioners, we have to hear these things over and over again and contemplate them before they begin to link up and make sense. So then one of the things that can also develop if we don't practice humility, time spent in holy company, and patience with the progress of our understanding, and faith in the words of the scriptures and the teachers and our guru, we can fall into this pratiloma, which is inadvertence towards following the way of harmony, unity, and natural balance. Babaji writes, it is caused by a distortion in the mind, which neglects or rejects the light of higher intelligence and accepts the ego's divisive tendencies, right? Doesn't that sound like what we've been describing here? it leads to twisted thinking that is antagonistic to the presence of the divine in all things, and then strives to eradicate that, placing creations of its own design into operation and superiority. So that's kind of a mouthful, so let me just read that again. These tendencies that reject the light of higher intelligence and instead dwells on the ego's own divisive tendencies as the right way, this leads to twisted thinking that is antagonistic to the presence of the divine in all things, and strives to eradicate that divine, you know, and we can see that in scientific circles that discount, you know, a source of awareness, that discount the presence of consciousness, capital C, that instead they place their own creations and design into operation and superiority. So that's what I wanted to share in particular about these, so that we're not only aware of them if we have any bit of this left inside of ourselves, which I know I do, but also so that we recognize it in and around us, in the value of being able to recognize what's going on around us in these ways is that then we know how to approach it. We know where it's coming from, and we don't, if we see it out there, we don't have to get frustrated by it. The fact that we can recognize it means that it won't overpower us. So then the next part of this class is, let me introduce the next verse, which is verse 12. So thereafter, I'm just going to read it. The 11 main characteristics of Maya were rendered clear to my intelligence. This knowledge inspired me to recite the 20 truths of truth daily with heartfelt devotion. So the 11 main characteristics of Maya show up in Babaji's chart called the evolutes of Maya. And I find it very interesting. Let me go ahead and share this after all. I find it very interesting and revealing that in the Encomium, we get the 16 evolutes first, right? Because, and I think it's because they're a little more identifiable than initially the characteristics of Maya. So the gracious Guru came along and taught and warned our poet sage here about the 16 evolutes of Maya. And so then contemplating that, recognizing them throughout relativity, then the 11 main characteristics of Maya become clear when taught those. So that's where we're going to go right now. We're going to go to the evolutes of Maya. We always give it that shorthand name, but it's also the evolutes, characteristics, and limiting factors of Maya. So we're going to probably spend the rest of this class just on this. And also on the 7 malas, which come a little bit later. So let's take a look here. Oh no, I have a note to myself. Let's first take a look at what Lord Vashishta has to say. I need to expand this a little bit. The knowledge of diversity constitutes Maya. So it should be overcome by knowing that one who is beyond diversity and the very nature of homogeneity. So the knowledge of diversity, that shows you how embedded in our mind it is, because that's what we're seeing all the time. And so the practice of study of the scriptures, listening to the teacher, contemplation, and contemplation leading into meditation, via concentration, that this is what allows us to set everything aside and begin to look at that one. So as long as this knowledge of diversity is present in the mind, so is Maya. Here he says, Maya pervades everything, and its axle of delusion is the human mind. Okay, think of an axle, right? If in an axle of a car, there's two wheels going, right, attached to either end. And so the axle of delusion is the human mind, and it's rolling, it's attached to the motor, et cetera. So the axle moves, that moves the wheels, right? So long as that axle keeps turning, and that's the mind, Maya is throwing up this delusion. So Maya pervades everything, and its axle of delusion is the human mind. Destroy Maya with pure Maya. The Guru's words are the pure Maya. And so this takes us to also back to Sri Ramakrishna saying that there's Vijamaya and Avijamaya. And here we have Vijja Shakti and Avidya Shakti. We'll get to that in a moment. And then Lord Vashishta says down here, only those who are aware of Maya and its dangers find refuge. Those who are not get whirled about in the storm of creation and destruction. So we have to be aware of it. So to begin with, we have Parabrahma or Parashakti. We have also the, here as the source of all. We have Mahashakti, Mahamaya, the Divine Mother, Shaktiman, and out of that comes Paravidya, which is also Om, the supreme knowledge. Out of that evolves out, or from there next, we have the four primary Shaktis, Icha, Jnana, Kriya, and Dravya. And for those who are not familiar with these, Icha Shakti is Mother's divine will. It's the kind of will that can never be contradicted. And her Jnanam, her knowledge, spontaneous action is Kriya. And she's the producer of substances, so Dravya Shakti. So these four Shaktis are then used by her because she's the Shaktiman. That means the wielder of Shakti. And next comes Maya and Mulavidya. So this is all, evolution coming out at the highest level. And so here at that Maya and Mulavidya, we get to the first part of our verse 12, the 10 characteristics of Maya. So we're going to jump here to another chart that gives a more expanded explanation of the characteristics, along with what the simplified one that is in the chart. So it is eternal, for it exists even after pralaya, the dissolution of the universe of name and form. So pralaya, we know that as when the gunas go into equilibrium. And we also know that and from the tantric perspective, also the the four Shaktis, Icha, Jnana, Kriya, and Dravya, they come to rest. So that's pralaya. But Maya remains as in seed form to come back out. So it's eternal. So we can say here that this kind of eternal is not identical to the eternal of Parabrahma or Parasha, Supreme Divine Mother. It's in this sense, we look at it in a slightly conditioned relative way. So from the standpoint of the phenomenal worlds and their manifestation and their dissolution, from that standpoint, it's eternal. It is illusory, since it creates illusion in the minds of living beings. Think about that for a minute. It is illusory because it creates illusion in the minds of living beings. The truth is homogeneous. The truth of reality is indivisibility, is absolute purity, is undivided existence, unwavering consciousness, all of this, perfect freedom, unconditioned freedom. So the fact that the opposite of all of that is constantly rising in our mind is part of that illusion. And in that context, it made me think of this quote that Babaji recites for us so often out of the Avadhuta Gita. Ignorance is not real. Then how can it cause any real doubt? In other words, all the doubt that arises in the mind is unreal. It's not real, it's unreal. Anyway, therefore, what does the yogi do with the mind and mental projections? He allows them to rise spontaneously each day, then dissolves them back at the end of the day, like bubbles into water. So here we can think, then we can remember that when we think about the illusory nature of Maya. So it is insentient, being the very material of the many worlds, it is insentient. So matter is insentient. We learned that from the 10 tenets of Samkhya. It undergoes transformation without ever losing its own identity. In Footfalls, when Babaji is discussing this, he spends quite a bit of time talking about how all the multitude, it undergoes transformation and it keeps producing more and more. And it also comes up in this next one. It is the seed of creation. It is the seed that has spawned the universe, which appears, again, illusion, right? Like a mirage before the mind and senses. And since it is the initial cause of manifestation, it acts in hundreds of ways, each of them with many permutations. So here, that one goes with, it has evolutes similar to it. So everything that comes out, think about a tree, and the tree produces leaves and it produces seeds, right? I remember Babaji used to talk about all of nature being a seed and leaf and etc. Creation machine. So everything that comes out from this initial seed of Maya, the seed that's the cause of manifestation, it just keeps rolling along, not only creating more of itself, but different versions of itself in all the many different ways. So that's the context in which it has evolutes similar to it. And all these things are illusory. They're all insentient and so forth. It has no beginning, middle, or end. Now, those of us who are especially familiar with Vedanta will go, well, wait a minute. How can it have no end? Shankara has told us that it has an end in liberation. But what is usually meant here is that individuals may get free, but it's still there for all the others who haven't risen up and out of it. So it has no beginning, middle, or end. And just like, we often come across this in the scriptures that, Brahma and the others know not her birth, know not the birth of the Divine Mother. Therefore, we call her unborn. Okay, so she was there before they were. In the same way, for beings attached to relativity, Maya was there before their birth, before any of their births. And so they don't, it's just beginningless for them. It was always like this. Will always be like this, is the feeling. So the main thing is that it will continue there for those who do not get up and out of Maya. All of its evolutes partake of the same nature, which we have spoken of. It supports sense perception and activity in beings, so long as the results of past deeds are not exhausted or neutralized. So here, that goes with it supports karma and the whole field of karma, which is all based upon sense perception, the senses going out to the objects, and engaging in activity with self-arrogating thought. In other words, I, me, and mine, which creates karma. And then it can be recognized. It can be recognized by the grace of God revealed in the illumined intellect. So let's go back. Let's go back now to our other chart here on the evolutes of Maya. So we have all of this going on. And one of the things that we can see about this is that nothing about it is out to get us, right? It's actually very neutral. If we want to sport in Maya, if Mother, Divine Mother, if the supreme reality from the tantric perspective wants to provide a place for beings to support, all of this needs to be there. So it doesn't have to be a problem, so long as we keep in mind the difference between the self and the not self, the difference between consciousness and matter. So from this, we get Prakriti and nature, and out of that come the birth of the jivas, the individual beings. And then we hit a T intersection here. And we have, it looks like a choice, but that will depend upon what our samskaras are. Think of this as something that's constantly going on. There's no first time for any of this, right? Maya has no beginning. So from here, Paravidya, we now have come down to Aparavidya, the lower knowledge that has to do with phenomena at the physical level, at the mental level, at the causal level, right? So Vidya means knowledge. Have we encountered the teachings? Have we encountered the Guru? So do we have an awareness of our true nature, that consciousness is separate from matter? So if we have any of those ideas, that we will head towards Vijja Shakti. And this would be the way of sporting in Maya, would be take up Vijja, Vijja Maya or Vijja Shakti, and head towards the supreme knowledge, which leads towards liberation, and then either merge back into the ultimate or come back to sport, and that doesn't make sense to some, but come back for loka sangraha, for the good of the world, come back because you want to help other beings realize the truth. Anyway, so those are the options. If, on the other hand, we have this mula vidya, this root ignorance predominant in the mind, if we have desire, if we look out on nature and go, oh boy, I can't wait to experience that. I want to make use of seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, tasting, all of that, then we're going to take the route of Vidya Shakti. Now, this makes it look very, very cut and dry, but it's not. Remember when we were looking at the four fruits of life, this particular area is, we might still have some avidya shakti operating in our mind, but we have taken a hold of dharma, and we're, working our way through dharma, artha, kama, heading towards moksha. So, there's nuance in all of this. But now let's take it a little darker then. So this avidya shakti leads to bondage, right? So if we're not putting, dharma first, then there's going to be more and more falling. And the distorting and veiling powers, the way that Maya kind of creates, puts out this projection. If we know who we are, then it's sport. If we don't know who we are, then it's the distorting and veiling powers in the mind. And when desire gets in there, it creates all the problems that we're really quite familiar with. So the way Tantra talks about this is the 7 malas. And actually, before we get to the 7 malas, let's go to yet another chart. This is one that sometime in the last 6 months, Babaji went through in great detail. And this is called the hierarchy of existence. And this is Tantra, yes, but it's from the Shaivite schools. And we want to take a look at the way the malas are presented here, as well as what the jivas are doing in their movement towards liberation. So in the realm of Maya that is very impure, that means further away, where beings are further away from their source. See, we have this area down here. This area is influenced by Maya, whereas this area is free of Maya. And remember where we had that T intersection where people could go towards Vidya Maya or go towards Avidya Maya, Vidya Shakti versus Avidya Shakti. And I said that there's a lot of nuance. This is what really talks about it. So let's take a look at these 3 malas, because these are like umbrella malas compared to the ones that we're going to look at in the evolutes of Maya. So this anava it's inherent, you would say. These are inherent malas. So it's primal ignorance, it's connate or inherent impurity, it's the deluding power, it's the obscuring force. Okay, these last for a very, very long time. When you take a look at this in this hierarchy of existence of hierarchy of existence. These things are they're just part of what makes everything possible. You can't sport unless you have some of this. And then there's the Mayika. So this is where these kinds of malas, they provide the mind and the body. They fabricates, these malas fabricate the worlds. They produce objects. They encourage enjoyment, these kinds of malas. And then there's the karmika. This is more difficult. These limit, this is where our karmas are coming to the fore. So it limits cognition, it compels one to action, it's constantly throwing up merit and demerit and all other pairs of opposite, and it binds one to samsara, or rounds of birth and death in ignorance. So taking a look, now let's not go there, that's like too much right now, but well, let's do it just very, very briefly. So the jivatmas are of three kinds of individual selves, okay? So there are those that are bound by all three malas, right? The anava, the mayika, and the karmika, okay? Those are the sakala jivas. And then the other two are different stages of receiving Shiva's grace through teachers, through jnanam, and through diksha, that is initiation. So, these are working their way up. And then higher than them are the Mantreshvaras, and they still have a sense of attachment to Maya, and they're under the control of Maya. They're still influenced. And then above them, beings get free of Maya. But there's even here with these beings, these Vidyeshvaras, there's still a slight separation from Shiva. So you can see that these last quite a ways. So from these kind of umbrella malas, let's go back to our Evolutes of Maya chart and take a look at these 7 malas. And we're not going to spend lots of time on these because it's going to come up in another verse down the road in the Encomium. Excuse me. Okay, so moha, we usually hear this word as delusion, but this is, think about it. We've got we have the veiling power of Maya and its distortion, which is projecting all kinds of things. We've taken up avidya shakti as our mode of operation. And this means that we're really attached, mudavasta, mamakara. Remember, these are things like being unaware of one's true self, giving in to I, me, and mine, mistaking the body for the self and the self for the body, outgoing senses and mind, etc. So, consciousness is pretty veiled here. And so here, moha is, Babaji talks about it like deluded fascination. This is the kind of fascination that causes beings to become attached to evil deeds as if they were good deeds. Now, this is in the extreme example, but you can say that we become attached. We think that what's bad is good, we're doing things that are going to cause suffering, but we think that it's pleasure, right? We think, just to use a base example, that drinking alcohol will make us feel good and make us feel happy and make us forget our sorrows. And instead, it just increases suffering, right? We may have momentary pleasure, but it increases suffering. So this is deluded fascination. The next one is mada, and it's like pride, conceit, self-aggrandizement. a word that can be used for it is vainglory. So everything that, one is fastened to the world with a sense of pride and gaining pride in it, and has conceit of their knowledge, and everything is to take to oneself, self-aggrandizement. Now, raga is attachment. And, sometimes in other tantric systems, we see that up very, very high in the cosmology, representing attraction, right? And we can think of it, we know it also as the positive thing, what attracts the soul to God, what attracts the student to the teacher, what attracts the child to the mother, and the mother to the child and the father, etc. Things like that. Well, that's, the positive, helpful side of it. But when it becomes morbid attachment, it cripples the human mind by robbing it of its freedom and spontaneity. It ties the body and its energy to the yoke of subservience and slavery. Such is the nature that it leads to deeper and deeper modes of bondage, and will not fully let go its hold even after personality, objects, actions, or thought are transcended. So this is a difficult one. And we can see, and this is part of the point of showing this, showing all this, we can see how these, coming through this filter of the 7 malas, really allows all of these evolutes of Maya to flourish. So the next one is Vishada, and we know this from the Gita as depression, Arjuna's Vishada yoga, his depression and dejection, and it's associated with tamas. Then there's Shoka, which is just out and out sorrow, despair, and suffering. It's a vast set of afflictions, Babaji writes, that plague the mind and sap the body, mind, and soul of vitality and motivation, and leads one to doubt and complacency. Vichitra, we can, think of this one along with Vishaya Shakti, distractions, varieties, for the sake of experiencing diverse pleasures in the form of tastes and feelings and sights, and even intellectual stimulation. Beings take to Vichitra like an old friend, Babaji writes. In conjunction with moha, appear deluded fascination, it attracts the mind and senses to the many, thereby obscuring the one, which is, as he writes, a characteristic trick of Maya. Now there's another chart that makes this a little easier to follow. Here we go. And then the last one is delight, excitement, the delight one takes in pleasure, which contributes to the desire for increased pleasure. And again, we can see how all of these fit in here. So as I was studying for this class and really spending a lot of time with the chart on the evolutes of Maya, I came across this quote in the Footfalls, page 282. And in that area, you'll also find the chart. Babaji writes, Avidya Shakti veils whatever intrinsic knowledge the soul possesses, and a visit to the realm of the 7 malas of Maya is assured. So that really put the malas in perspective for me, that since Avidya Shakti veils whatever intrinsic knowledge we have, then a visit to the realm of the 7 malas is assured. So this we'll have more time with that, so we're not going to go further into it. And I think we've spent enough time on the evolutes. So in verse 12, we're looking at the 10 characteristics. I wonder if all of you, like myself, found that by having spent some time with, let me go back to this chart, spent time with these evolutes, that and understanding what they mean and how they play out, then these 10 characteristics begin to make more sense. When we look at then the evolutes, we see their presence in them. But the final point in all of this, which is there in verse 12, is that this knowledge of the characteristics of Maya, they led our poet sage to recite the 20 truths of truth daily with heartfelt devotion. Now, we'll get into that next time and go on, actually. But what we know about the 20 truths of truth, which can be found in the 24 aspects of Mother Kali, is that they all pertain to the unchanging immovability, indivisible, homogeneous, perfect, pure nature of reality. And when we look at the characteristics of Maya, we see that it's all about change. So, when we say it's eternal, this is the changing eternal. And, creating illusion in the mind is creating change. And that illusion, we falsely identify with all that change. It projects the universe, etc. So the main point here is really about how all of this is about change. And so how does our poet sage address it? He addresses it, or she addresses it, with turning to the real, turning to what's unchanging. So let's just get a little taste of it right here. So this is from the chapter in the 24 aspects of Mother Kali, or 24 aspects of Mother Kali, where the focus is on her nakedness. And the idea is that she is clothed in space. She is disembodied, clothed in space. Nothing can cover her. She is truth itself. Yeah, the naked truth is one of the epithets in that chapter. And so when we talk about the naked truth, the uncovered truth, then Maya just has to run away. Phenomena has to run away. Delusion has to run away. So here are some of them. Truth is, and the other thing to know about this truth, oh my goodness, we're at the end. I'm so sorry, everyone. I didn't realize that we had gone over. Okay, well, we will pick this up next time. And I encourage everybody who has 24 aspects and those who don't have it to go get it and read about this there. So let me go ahead and bring this to a close. Om Asato Ma Sadgamoya, Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamoya, Mirichur Ma Amritam Gamoya, Abhira Abhira Maedi, Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukam Tenamam Pahinicham. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from the illusion of death to realization of eternal existence. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all living beings. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.